We're about to get started.
In progress.
Okay, we have some attendees.
Yep. Okay, so I'm going to give it about 60 seconds and then I'll get you guys introduced and we can get the ball rolling.
Yeah, it keeps going up. Got some new people tonight, Susan.
Yeah, there's some names I don't recognize. That's great.
Yeah, that is good.
Wonderful. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to get started, and we can't wait to get started. So good evening, everyone, and my name is Jeanette Locke, and I am the Director of the Greater Philadelphia Region and Multicultural Outreach at the Epilepsy Foundation of Eastern PA. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the 7th session of the Special Journey Solutions, Navigating Key Options for Families with Special Needs webinar series. Tonight's topic is difficult conversations and decisions. And as usual, you will hear from our wonderful financial planning experts, Susan Walter and Bruce Sham. Please have your questions, whatever questions you may have, place them in the chat box for Susan and Bruce. And so welcome, Susan and Bruce, once again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to share screen while I do housekeeping. I'm going to drive the train or conduct the train or whatever that's called. All right. Hopefully everyone can see that. You've got our faces in multiple boxes, I'm sure. All right. So tonight, Jeanette, thank you so much. And welcome back for fall. This is one of the last few sessions in our complete year series. And one of the things that we realized, we get calls at least once a week. In fact, we had one today kind of talking about this topic. And it's when sometimes family members don't all agree about direction, or there are some special cases, or maybe there's a divorce. There are all sorts of bespoke, unique situations where people give us a call and say, "Wow, there's a fire. What do we do?" And so one of the things we wanted to do tonight was kind of talk about the difficult conversations that happen at a lot of different levels between family, friends, in the nuclear family, in the extended family and friends, and then also in cases of divorce. And so there are always solutions. Sometimes they can take a little longer than other kinds of solutions, but I thought we'd sort of dissect them tonight. It's going to be a Q&A type format. So some of these are kind of combined little case study questions. Some of these are actual questions that we get from clients. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can chat with you, but I will put this up later. Hang on just a second. Okay. So Bruce is here. My name is Susan. This is my colleague, Bruce. Between us, we have way too many years of experience. we're kind of, you don't necessarily shock us, but yes, we've heard it all. All right.
And yeah, Susan, for some of the new people on the call, I think it's important to let them know that we are both parents of individuals with special needs. So we live this every day ourselves. It's not just something that we've studied and, we practice as a profession. We live it.
Yes. Yes,
Right?
we do. I was living it an hour ago at the pharmacy. Okay. So I'm going to start with kind of nuclear family, some of the situations that we find coming into the office, calling the office. What do we do? What are we going on? So here's our first example. One spouse has been the point person for retirement planning, finances, decision-making regarding money, bill paying. What role should or can the other spouse do? How does he or she get caught up? What does he or she need to know? What do you think, Bruce? Do you want to start with
Okay.
some of them? That's all right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We do put together a plan, when we work with families so that there is a cohesive plan there. But typically there is one party that sort of takes more of that active role. We've put together what we call a letter of intent, and if Jeanette gets us everybody's email address, because there are a number of new people on the call today, I have some of the emails, but for the new folks, if we have your email address, I can send you out an electronic version of a booklet that we've put together. It's a working document. I see somebody already wrote up, absolutely, so that's great. What our loved ones need to know. So everything is between two covers. And again, things are going to change, things are going to update, but I do think it's very important that that be available. Particularly, if one spouse passes and we have an executor that's going to take over, or a sibling. Today, we had a sibling call. It was just so sad. Unfortunately, we had everything. I was able to get the documents, get to them. The mother took very, very ill, and now he's in charge of his sister. And it was very sad. It really was. But fortunately, and he already wrote back to me, Susan, he was so thrilled that we had everything and that we were able to address it almost immediately. And what was interesting, for those of you on the call, it was the sibling with the special needs that asked her brother to call and said, you need to call. Mom is sick. Mom can't do this. And I need you to understand what's in place. And I just thought that was just like really really heartwarming. And, the brother, Mr. Rough and Tough, but definitely, took the challenge and responded appropriately. And fortunately, this was a situation where the family had planned and things were in place. So I think having that, Susan, I think is very, very helpful. I know it's hard. I think we always say, my wife and I say it all the time. I say to her, you really need to understand where I have everything. You need to know, it's right here. It's right here. Here's a copy. Keep it safe. But it does have to be updated, and it does require some conversation. We try to do at least quarterly reviews, with clients, or at least minimum twice a year, just to make sure that everybody is up to speed on what's going on. And I think it's also important to have some flexibility in documents for those unexpected scenarios. And, when we get to the last vignette, Susan, right when you left at 4:00, I had a couple who was getting divorced, but doing their legal documents together as a couple for the benefit of their child with special needs. And again, I just give them so much credit that they could put their personal feelings aside for the benefit of the child.
Mm-hmm.
And that will make for a much smoother transition should something happen to them individually.
So I know this is really romantic, but on our anniversary, my husband and I do like a binder review, and we remind each other what documents are in this big pile of stuff. Where do you go? Where do you find these things? And so it's just those annual reminders. Even if we're not making changes, we are at least having that conversation once or twice a year. What's in that big file? And so where to find things, the phone numbers. I just saw my mom over the weekend. Even though she and I speak frequently, she got out her binder and she said, I'm adding all of these new documents so you know what to do with X, my house. And so we added lots of paper, and she said, I don't think you need copies of this, but here it is in the binder. And so we just have that single place where everybody knows where to go to get the stuff or who to call.
That is so, so important and so helpful.
Question number 2, or situation number 2. A client understands the basics of planning and saving for retirement. What does the discussion look like when you're adding in I'm going to put it in quotes, the third retirement, planning for that individual, the child with special needs? Resources, lists, framework, what to consider. Where does one begin? And that's one of the most common questions we get is, there's a lot of new stuff. Where do I start? You can take it.
You want me to take over here? Okay. And you know, this is probably one of the more difficult parts of the work that we do. Obviously, many of us might know the costs that we're incurring for our child, to keep our child safe, to keep our child active, to keep our child cared for. When our children are younger, you know, and we are doing everything possible to get them the best education and the best services and to get them as equipped for life the best that we can, we still don't really know what those costs are going to be for them to be successful, to be independent. Are the children going to be gainfully employed? What is gainful employment? What is the government's definition of gainful employment versus what we all know is truly income that we can live on?
Right.
But we absolutely have some, you know, some scenarios and some baselines that we can share with you of, you know, what it does cost based on different scenarios. That being said, and many of you who we've worked with have heard me talk about this, that if your child is eligible for waiver services, that needs to be taken into consideration as well. If the state of Pennsylvania is actually allocating dollars for your child, whether it be through the Department of Aging and Long-Term Living or through the Department of Intellectual or Behavioral Disabilities, these can be substantial amounts of money that are allocated. And many families feel that, you know, look, I need to recognize that and build that into my plan. That being said, there are also families that say to me, Bruce, every year I hear the government's cutting them. They're not going to be available. I don't want to make a plan thinking that I'm going to have this and then having it fall apart. And the last part of that is when the waivers are there, but because the family has not planned properly, the waiver does fall apart. I mean, we get more calls about that where, hey, my brother just lost his Medicaid. I don't know why. He's had it for 30 years. What happened? Well, you know, we think that by having a will, all of our affairs are in order, right? The will says my assets are going to go to a special needs trust. Well, but my life insurance policy was never changed. A lawyer is not going to go call your life insurance company and change your beneficiary for you. That is really back up to you to then, after you have the will, contact your insurance companies, contact your investment companies, contact your HR, contact your retirement companies, and update the beneficiaries to recognize the trust that you've created.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, and that money flows to your child, they are going to lose their benefits. They are going to be suspended. We have clients call and say, they just charged me back $28,000 and they expect me to pay it back because we've had more than $2,000 in our bank account on such and such a day. We have to serve a couple of different masters here. You know, we have to make sure that our children's benefits are not compromised. And then, of course, there's always the scenario where that loving relative thinks they're doing a wonderful thing by leaving money to our child, maybe never even telling us. Okay, but, you know, and some of you have heard me say this. My single niece, Lori, who works for the state of New York, left her 401k to my daughter, $400,000. Now, fortunately, she told me about it. Fortunately, we're in a tech age where we could run right upstairs and change the beneficiary on the computer before she drove home. But, you know, I really shudder to think how often these things happen, right? Where, you know, again, the child, God, I've been doing this 47 years. I remember years ago, kids who were in Mary Campbell Center in Delaware, residential, and Aunt Mary left $400,000, which was a ton of money 40 years ago. And that had to all be spent down. The child lost their Medicaid, and then they had to wait to get approved for waiver services so that they could continue to stay in the facility. So it's really, really important that, you know, that we have these plans in place and we let our families know that if anybody is planning on leaving money to our children, that we do have this trust set up. Okay. And what is the name and what is the tax ID number and what is the date of that document? I know there's always the scenario where, multi-generations, and I know some of you on the call, we've even talked about this, where great-grandparents have set up trusts. Obviously, we never even had our children. Some of us have adopted children, right? Not, and life happens, right? But fortunately, for this family, the lawyers that drafted the documents had built-in flexibility and powers of appointment so that the family was able to receive the monies, but make the changes necessary so their children's benefits would not be compromised. And I think more and more attorneys are aware of this. I always caution families that, you want to talk to an attorney, an elder care or special needs lawyer. They're very similar. That, all estate lawyers understand trusts, but special needs trusts are different. They are unique. Our child, they're irrevocable. Our child cannot have access to that money as, children can in regular irrevocable trust if it's for estate planning. And, when Bruce turns 25, 30, 35, he can start accessing principal. If our children are receiving benefits, they can't have that language in their documents, because then the state is going to say, well, that really, the child has means. And when we're working with means tested benefits, our children are restricted to that $2,000 resource limit.
Right. So the other aspect of this is that when communicating with some of the other family members or friends, always having a copy, at least the first page. But if the other entities, other lawyers, HR, whatever, 401ks, whatever, they will require the full copy of that special needs trust.
Yep. They often will.
They're compliant.
Want a copy of the trust document.
Yes,
And, and I can tell you how important that is, because, and this wasn't even a special needs case, but it's a case that was written back in the probably 60s, way before I was even in the business. I didn't come into the business of 78, and I sort of inherited this. And the language said that there was a trust and the wife was the trustee. And they went to, we just paid out the claim. And I get a call from the beneficiaries. We don't have a trust account to deposit this into. No bank will let us cash this check. And I said, I've been servicing your parents all these years. It's always been, Mrs., as trustee. And lo and behold, whoever set it up years ago, there never was a trust.
Oh,
There
wow.
never was a trust. So it's very important that these things, be up to date and reviewed, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
make sure that those documents are accurate.
Right. Yeah. I keep a list of the people that I've sent copies to in case we ever have changes to something. I make sure that I can reach out to all those individuals. Right.
It's very important. And you may have people in your documents who are no longer capable of serving. They themselves may have gotten ill. They may have been going through their own personal crisis or divorce. You may no longer feel comfortable using them in the documents. We do have to take that responsibility to update our documents periodically.
Yep. So in answering that last little question, where do you begin? You begin by taking an inventory of all the things that need to get done. So some things will be like dominoes, do A, B, and C in that order. Other things can be done concurrently, but you really don't know what that list looks like until you just sit down, lay it all out, and figure out the plan. So it's very unique to each situation. And it depends on the age of the child as well. So is a child pre-18, post-18, and what needs to get done then too.
And sometimes we have to prioritize, like you talked earlier today about a fire, right? And you got to put out the fire, but there may be a lot of different fires simmering, along the way. If we are having children that are approaching age 18, and we need to make sure that, they don't have more than $2,000 of assets. I had a child today who inherited $25,000 from the death of an aunt. And, that's like, well, too much for an ABLE account, right? We can only put $18,000 in ABLE account, but that's still left $7,000. And, we're only allowed to have $2,000. So do we have to set up a first party trust just to, fortunately, the law firm was very, very accommodating. They had a $1,300 bill to pay, a $2,000 bill to pay, and a $3,200 bill to pay. And they paid the bills directly before the family received the money. And then we opened up immediately an ABLE account, and the balance of the money the attorney is paying into the ABLE account for the young man. And it worked out. But we might have had to set up an emergency first party trust. And again, many of you have heard me say this young man, 59 years old. Had he been 65 years old, we would not have been able to set up a first party trust,
Right.
because they must be in effect before the age of 65.
Yes. Speaking of families, I'm going to pivot just a little bit. In a family, here's a question. In a family, there are other siblings to consider when planning for the financial needs of the one with the disability. When do we begin discussing this? How do we choose between them? What if none of the other siblings are capable, like maybe they have a job where they travel, for example, or maybe they don't want to assume responsibility for their other sibling, the one with the disability? What age, by the way, is appropriate to name them as a trustee? What do other families do when planning inheritances? Equal versus fair? Question mark.
Yeah, fair versus equal. That I say all the time that I think that you do need to start talking about it with your children when they're very young, because if you're not talking about it, they are thinking about it. They are wondering. My kids are all in their, late 30s, 40s, and, I still will hear, my two neurotypical kids going, "Oh, it's always Amanda. It's always Amanda," right? Yeah. "Oh yeah, Dad, I know Amanda," right? But, I need to remind them, they got college, they got cars, they got weddings, they got baby rooms full of furniture, right? When does it stop, right? When does it stop? Help with just about anything that they need. But Amanda's going to need more than they do when I'm no longer here. And typically, the other children would be the beneficiary of a trust. A trust does have an end date. We always seem to talk about what the trust is doing for our loved one while they're alive. Trusts do end. And we do need to have provisions for what happens to those monies when the individual who's the beneficiary of that trust does pass. And so I have explained to my other kids that, you are going to get this money. You're going to get all the money at some point. And, and I'm exaggerating to make a point. My kids are great, and we have a great family dynamic, thank God. But they know, one, they're happy that Amanda is going to be taken care of, right? They want to know. A lot of times kids want to know that we as parents have provided for that child, and it's not going to be their responsibility. If you saw the look on that young man's face today, he was absolutely petrified. Mm-hmm. He has been pretty much estranged from his family and doing his own thing, right? Just as a regular young man growing up. What if his wife or girlfriend didn't want any parts of his sister? Imagine that. All of a sudden now, never really had that conversation, never really thought about it, right? Never thought for 1 minute that this could possibly happen. The mother was vital and vibrant, one of the nicest people that I knew. And now she's just suffering with severe mental illness. Just couldn't believe it when they were talking to me today. And, a lot of times he was thrilled to know that there were plans in place for his sister and he didn't have to worry. Right. But again, these are conversations. Everybody's family is different. Everybody's family situation is different. Everybody's money is different. Mm-hmm. Right. There's no cookie cutter answer for this.
Right.
And, we also have situations when there are no other siblings, right, Susan, to take on that responsibility. Right. And we have to look to corporate trustees or institutional guardians or other organizations. A lot of charitable organizations are starting to put together programs to help families who are in this situation. Mm-hmm. This is something that we've seen starting to percolate lately. Families getting together and purchasing homes and sharing services. if Susan and I each only have that PFDS waiver for $43,000, okay, if we had a third person, we could each have 8 hours of service,
Right.
and our 3 kids could live together with rotating caregivers, not one person for 24 hours, but 3 8-hour people
Mhm.
that come in every 8 hours that are fresh and vibrant, and we could share resources. So, and we're starting to see more and more of this happen all the time.
Right. We structured it so that my daughter has always been agreeable to become my son's trustee. And she was still in school, she was working on doctoral programs, and we knew that any kind of burden for her would pull her away from sort of her trajectory. So we framed it so that she wouldn't assume any responsibilities until she was much older. I think we wrote it in there 30, 35 years old. And that gave her an ability to kind of launch. And she was using a different member of the family then who would be primary until she was older, and she still has the option to decline. We have the option and flexibility to name someone else. There are perhaps cousins, neighbors, other kids who grow up and they become social workers or psychologists or something else where they actually have interest in some of this and might still know your child. So we can get kind of creative in taking a look at kind of a structure, not of a single person, and that's a hard decision to make, but perhaps like a bouquet.
Network.
Yeah, network, right. Who might,
Network of people.
yeah.
And Susan, like we do find that I heard you say neighbor, and at first when I heard people say, well, we have a friend, and they've always been involved in our lives, and they were there when the kids were born or when the kids were adopted, and always took an interest in the children, and maybe for a period of time while the other sibling is finishing graduate school, or you know what I mean? Like, it's a big responsibility. I mean, it is our full-time job when we're caring for our child. But if somebody knows they're doing it for 2-3 years, and they know that this is not a financial burden to them, right? The finances are in place. It's just the caregiver, the care management, or the overseer. Okay. It's very different. And I always tell families, when you are ready to make that ask, and I know it's so stressful, right? But if you start the conversation with, I am not asking you to take on a financial burden, okay? Finances are not the concern.
Right.
You are the person that we have the most respect and trust in, and feel that you care about Amanda, Henry, whoever, right? And this would be for 2-3 years, while Seth is finishing graduate school, or while Mallory, is raising her babies, right? Like it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Right.
Right. I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And that idea of equal versus fair, I know in my side of the family, there was always the kind of philosophy that everything gets split down the middle. And that doesn't necessarily work when you're talking about someone with a disability, because in our planning, the conversation is around, we don't want my son to be a financial burden on my daughter. So we're setting these things up. We're setting you up over here, and you've got some flexibility to work with the plan. And so having those conversations, sometimes the kids can get kind of creative. My daughter's a little bit older now. She's understanding the world, and she wasn't able to buy $1 million mansion a year out of school. Now she understands why. Yeah. So anyway, she's got, she's matured, she's adulting, and she has a better understanding about what's really involved here. But we just have these ongoing conversations. Again, it's never a one-time thing, and you're building in the flexibility to pivot and change as circumstances change.
Sometimes our plans don't work, right? Like sometimes the thought, again, some of you have heard me say, I did purchase a house for my daughter at one point, thinking that she and a caregiver would live there, and it was fantastic, and we were so excited about it. And I didn't have to worry about the rents going up, and it wasn't an HOA situation, taxes were reasonable. And then I realized the minute something broke, like I'm a landlord now, right? It snowed, like I can't even get out of my own driveway. How am I going to get to that house and start shoveling the snow? How am I going to get there to cut the grass, right? Like if it really became an issue. Whereas in an apartment, she's able to go to maintenance office and just say, hey, my refrigerator's broken, and there'll be a new refrigerator there in 5 minutes, right? Like, again, the plans don't always work. And I always say, we want to make sure that we are still young and healthy enough to support our children through these difficult transitions. Because if it didn't work and I wasn't there to help, immediately, it could have been very difficult, very, very difficult. It's difficult enough in a perfect situation.
Right.
But I do think, that you do have to be flexible because things don't always work out perfectly.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yes. Mhm.
Roommates leave, family, right? You have the 3 people in that house. All of a sudden, one family leaves, one child passes away. Anything can change on a dime.
Yeah. And right. So there has to be that flexibility and the conversations. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm going to shift a little bit, talking about kind of working towards the extended family, moving out of the nuclear family. How do I broach the subject of special needs planning with extended family? I'm especially worried about one relative who does not believe that one of our kids has a true disability. How do I safeguard our child's future?
That really is a challenge, right? Like when, and I know that we all, have heard it at some point, particularly if the child has some like autistic characteristics. I mean, obviously a very clean medical issue is not going to be as controversy as some of the other mental illness type scenarios, children who are developing, bipolar issues. You can't always have those relatives say, I never liked his wife anyway. She caused it. Like these are horrible things. I mean, horrible, horrible things, but they do exist. We hear it all the time. I have a family whose names are on buildings down at University of Pennsylvania, and the grandfather was making gifts to the children every year, whatever the gift limit was. And he absolutely did not believe that his grandson had autism. And I finally said to his daughter, look, I'm going to have to tell your dad that he can no longer make the gift to your son. It has to go to the special needs trust that we set up. And if I tell you that gentleman hung up on me 3 times when I called, he thought I was just trying to solicit him. I was just trying to sell him, that I was just, some random advisor, financial advisor. And I said, and I remember I called back and I said, I think we got disconnected. And he said, we didn't get disconnected. And he said, I hung up on you, and I said, look, I'm calling for your daughter. And I explained the situation. And it's sad that the daughter didn't even feel comfortable enough that she could talk to her own father, because he so did not believe that the child had these issues. But again, I feel that, we have to educate these families. We have to educate the other family members. And I said, look, it's wonderful that you're making these gifts, and it's wonderful that he has these resources, and it's going to benefit him tremendously. But please, he has Medicaid. He has services to help him with after school. He may actually be qualifying for an autism waiver where he'll have full-time tutoring and assistance up to $165,000 a year while he's in college. Please make the gifts to this trust so we don't jeopardize that.
I think the
And
important
very important.
Well, it's that you also don't have to be alone. You can have third parties like us, for example, talking
Intervene.
on behalf, offering up kind of, we're not emotionally involved in the family dynamic, and we can have a slightly different conversation.
Yep.
And it can be very helpful. I know when we were doing some financial planning in my family, my mother once made a comment. It was kind of, it was very sweet. And she said, well, after I'm gone, I hope your brother does the right thing. I said, I wonder what that is. I don't know what the right thing is. What do you have in mind, Mom? And so all of a sudden it came out that she was still doing this 50-50 split thing, whatever. She's of a modest financial situation, but her philosophy was sister and brother, me and my brother, everything 50-50 split. But what she wanted was for me and my brother to do something for my son outside of that. But she didn't understand the tax complications and implications. She didn't understand how all of that kind of works. And so it was further conversations to find out what her true wishes were. And even if my brother was interested in being a part of kind of moving things around a little bit, making different plans, everyone was amenable. But I would say that was also like over the course of maybe 9 months. So it wasn't a one-off conversation, multiple talks, trying to get clarity, trying to understand very specifically what everyone's wishes were. So I'm in no way trying to guide her to doing things for my son, but I wanted to honor and kind of get to the bottom of whatever it was she was talking about, because it was still kind of vague. So don't assume that all generations, all people have as much information as you have. Well, I have to go back and check the chats.
Yeah,
But
I was too. I just
okay,
responded to somebody.
got it. Okay. So I think basically what I wanted to say was, you may be on a fast learning curve, understanding trusts and wills and financial planning and special needs trusts. A lot of people still don't have any of that basic information. So rely on others, such as us or these seminars, in order to educate them as well. Maybe they're interested in figuring it out with you. You don't necessarily have to just be making demands or asking. Okay, are you ready to go on to the next
Yeah,
question?
you had just said something that resonated with me, and then when you asked about the chat, I lost it. I lost my train of thought, but it
Oh,
was another thing that had happened today that along the lines of what you were just talking about, making plans where another person wanted to make the plan, and I hope it'll come back to me because it was very relevant. It was very relevant to what we're talking about.
sorry, just stick your hand
Um,
up and interrupt.
yeah, it's all good. It's all
Okay,
good. Yeah, let's go on.
so you mentioned,
Did we address the question though? Because I thought Lisa's question was, she had asked about groups that you can belong to. I mean, there are a number of support groups online. I was showing Susan today. But there's one group called Families Can, CANN, and they do meet monthly. They do have a pretty nice network. They have a lot of very interesting topics, very focused on housing and shared services. I mean, look, obviously, and I mean, this is the issue that we have, when our children are just medically compromised and don't have those other intellectual disability diagnoses, right? Like we're sort of working under one channel. If our children have multiple diagnoses or multiple issues, there probably are more services available, right? But through the the Office of Developmental Programs and Intellectual Disabilities, there are programs for shared housing and community living and support. I think it's always helpful to talk to your caseworkers, talk to your social workers, talk to your medical team, talk to the Epilepsy Foundation, right? Like for things that, other families have taken advantage of or made or availed themselves of, that are available.
yep. I think we touched on this before, but I'll ask the question just to make sure that you don't have anything extra to add. One client has one of those multi-generational trust issues, and the client is not one of the trustees. The trust was written so long before special needs was a thing, and I'm worried it might negatively impact my child's qualifications for income levels and waivers and what can be done. What can be done?
So, I mean, that does happen. Like I said, like when grandparents are putting in their documents that are great grandparents, that children and grandchildren and great grandchildren are going to inherit shares of the business and things like that. And then, 2 or 3 generations later, there's a child with special needs. And, again, fortunately, if the attorneys do put that power of appointment in there where the individual can make a change. Often if there are all of the trustees, all of the participants, beneficiaries are alive, you can actually, and we have seen that we go to the table and say, hey, look, I know this is the way great grandpa wrote it, but that little Mallory cannot, and we can make those changes. Everybody would be in agreement. But if that power of appointment was in there, which is really just giving the beneficiary the opportunity to make that change before the monies are received, that's a blessing. And that's what we call good lawyering, right? Like when we see that the lawyers, and I say this to families all the time. I mean, people will say to me, Bruce, I don't have a child with special needs. I don't need special needs language. Any one of our kids, God forbid, could be in a car accident and suffer a brain injury tomorrow. How many people today, our kids with sports, are suffering from frontal lobe dementia? We never even heard that term years ago. Right? But our children who wrestled, played football, hockey, lacrosse, right? I'm asked to speak at the Brain Injury Institute every year. And I've had families, I've even had friends of mine say, Bruce, we need to do that. Right? That you never would have thought it. But it's the same type of planning that everyone on this call are dealing with. Same kind of planning.
So just a real quick side question, and from Judy, does special needs trust have to be set up by an attorney?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Judy, it scares me, people, even when families say to me, we have the free legal service from the school district, okay? Susan and I are we work with all the special needs attorneys locally, and we have a pretty good relationship with them. We can actually send them a document and say, hey, I'm working with Judy. Does this language meet the definition, meet the term? Because sometimes a lawyer will say, should the child have a disability? Okay, it's going to follow the language, right? Like the Pennsylvania. You really have to but then on the next page it says, but Bruce can have access to the principal at age 25, 30, and 35. Okay. If it says, should Bruce be receiving benefits, then Robin as trustee can make sure that stays in a special needs trust. Okay. That's fine. But if on the next page it says, but at age 30, 35, Bruce has access to the principal, they just shot themselves in the foot.
Yeah.
Right? So, it really does make sense to have an attorney that works in this space, who understands it, who knows the law and, understands the law, because every state is different too. One of the lawyers that we work with just said to me today, I cannot do work in New Jersey any longer. They just keep changing and changing, and you really need to keep up on it. They would never want to make a mistake.
Right.
So, I think it really does make sense to make sure that the attorney is well versed. And like I said, elder care and special needs are very similar. I feel very good with, a lot of these elder care attorneys. We speak at the Bar Association. We participate in their continuing ed lectures every year. For the Bar Association. And like I said, elder care attorneys are very knowledgeable in this area as well.
Yes, absolutely. So how do you communicate with family and friends? Especially if you have a contentious relationship. And I'll just give you the example here. In my little family, there was a divorce, on my husband's side, there was a divorce. And so technically there were 3 sets of grandparents, but one of them sort of disenfranchised themselves from the family. And we still had to reach out to make sure that there wasn't something written in a will somewhere. And it was very, I would say it was a difficult conversation. It was a very difficult phone call. But for the most part, I wrote kind of a boilerplate email. We just sent it out to everyone, kind of like a, hey, I'm not assuming anything, but
Yep.
here's what we're doing for my Henry. And if you don't want to ruin his life, please jump on my bus. But in a really nice, gentle way. And I didn't include it with the holiday letter or the New Year's letter. I kept it separate from everything else, but it's also part of the planning and identifying some of the other future people who are also in the know. So it's not
Yep.
just me, or not just me and Bill, but also kind of like, who do you talk to? And I actually had a few people reach out, and it doesn't take much. It can be 5,000, it can be $10,000, and it can
Yep.
make really,
Put it over.
yeah.
Well, Susan, the family that we met with this morning at 8 o'clock, she was a widow. Her husband died at the age of 24, right? Her
Mhm.
son is now 19. Okay. She is remarried. We're talking, we're talking, and I'm trying to keep all the pieces in place here. And the son's father, okay, had other siblings, right? The parents have now passed. And because of the way the documents were set up per stirpes, right, to the issue of the father would go to her son.
Mhm.
Okay. He is now a 1/4 owner of a home in Louisiana. Okay. And while Medicaid does say that our children are allowed to own a home, if that house gets sold, he is now going to have 25% of a $500,000 house. And that's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, this is why we really ask the questions and have to find out, and again, a lot of times when we're working with families who have gone through a divorce, if I hear all the time, he's a bum, he has nothing, right? Does he have a home? Does he, he has to be living somewhere. Something is going to be passed. By not having a will, you have a will. The state of Pennsylvania has their laws of intestacy and how assets will pass. And those assets will find their way to your child. And this is when we do have to put in these emergency, first party trusts, which we hate doing because they're government payback trusts. If the amount of money is under the $18,000 limit, we can do the ABLE account. I've won many cases now with Medicaid over that. But you really have to have these plans in place. And like I said, more and more times the children are over 65.
Yeah.
We can't set up those first party trusts anymore.
Right.
So then you're really
Oh, no. It's a perfect dovetail with that
segue.
question. Yep. What happens if someone I didn't anticipate naming my now adult child in their will gives my child, and I just put this in parentheses, $5,000, $10,000. I really don't want him to lose his Medicaid or waivers. So
Yeah.
same thing, it's that emergency first party trust, right? And
Or the ABLE account if it's under 18,000. And
so
like I said today, the lawyer and there are Medicaid payback annuities. I mean, there are other things that we can look at, but then we have to make sure that the income that the annuity generates doesn't put the child over the income limit. We are dealing with resource limits and income limits, right? There are Medicaid payback annuities that can be utilized, but if it now brings my income over the threshold, it's not going to work. So, there are pool trusts. We're always a little bit nervous about pool trusts because, they're run typically by organizations, smaller organizations. We all worry, what if the organization goes out of business? What happens to the money? It's not insured. It's not, but that is another option. There are charitable organizations that will serve in that capacity. And basically they're pooling your money, our monies together so that they can get better rates and better investment advice. But believe me, if you have $5,000 and Susan has $500,000, when your 5,000 runs out, you're not getting Susan's 500. You know, people think that it's pooled. My child's got unlimited resources now. That
Yep.
is not the way it works.
Right.
All you're doing is pooling your investment management advice and being, because many of you have heard me say, a lot of these corporate trust companies require $1 million minimum. And, you know, most of us don't have that. So, you know, what do we do? In a pooled trust, you can pool resources so that you can meet some of those minimums and get some of that advice.
Right. Really quick, Judy says, ask, does special needs trust affect ABLE account? Basically, they can coexist.
And it's relatively new, Judy. The special need, the ABLE accounts, the law was passed in 2014. You know, like I said, I've been a financial advisor since 1978. I never saw an ABLE account available for sale until 2017.
Mhm.
The state of Pennsylvania has one that's $15 a quarter. That comes with a checkbook. It comes with a debit card. You apply online, paable.gov. It does have investment options, but you can also just keep it in a checking account if that's your preference. It does work very, very well. Vanguard has one. The American funds have one. I don't see many other private, you know, financial firms. The reason that we sort of navigate towards the state one is that, you know, Vanguard's not going to send you $5.35 because your son bought a Slurpee at Wawa when his, you know, work study class went out to lunch, right? Like, but with the debit card, he could buy the Slurpee, right? And really have that sense of independence. And what's nice about it, okay, so New Jersey does have a New Jersey ABLE account.
Each
Okay,
state
every state does have one. It's just that the states, Jersey, by the way, Judy, is a payback state, whereas Pennsylvania has made that decision that if you have an ABLE account and your child passes, it's not a payback state. But, you know, again, this is where every state can be a little bit different. But we do like the ABLE accounts because it does give our children that flexibility. It's not restricted in what they can use the money for. It grows tax-free. The money comes out tax-free. There are some very nice tax benefits. Special needs trusts are taxed at the highest income tax rate. They're
right.
taxed at 37%. So, you know, if we are able to take advantage of some of these other vehicles, we really want you to. I hope that answers the question.
In the interest of time, we have just over 5 minutes, maybe 6. I have 2 questions here, kind of in that category of divorce or blended families. So I'm just going to kind of read them together, and Bruce, we can just talk about collaborative divorce as well as setting up for blended family situations. We kind of touched on it. We're considering divorce after 20 years of marriage. We share 3 children, one of whom has the disability and will require lifetime supports. I anticipate it's going to be contentious. Any advice? ? And the other one is, my ex and I share custody. One of the children has a disability. Both of us are remarrying, and there will be stepchildren involved. There are worries about the ex's spouses, the new spouses, options, and all these other family dynamics. So, but you were talking to someone today in a collaborative divorce setting as well. So
it was amazing. It was amazing how cooperative they were. But I did keep thinking, Susan, they're newly divorced. They're both single. They're both young. You know, they're now both single, both young. And they only had the one child, which did make it a little bit easier, right? But I immediately was thinking, the minute one of them gets remarried and has other family members that they need to take care of, it's gonna be a problem.
right.
It is absolutely going to be a problem. And now I remember what it was that I had wanted to say before, because that was the situation. The young man's father wanted to give the child money to buy a car. Okay, that this child could pretty much be able to drive. And so we were thinking, well, where does he put the money, right? Do we put the money in the trust today, or does the father hold on to it and then buy the car? But again, now it's a divorce. There's not as much trust there, right? Like here we're setting up a trust where they're both co-trustees. They both are going to have say with the money, immediately while everything was going great. Immediately when that came up, she said, and what are you doing with your father's money? So sometimes, and we resolved it, we resolved it, but sometimes that's when, maybe we do have to each have our own trust and, but collaborative is really wonderful if it works. You've fallen out of love with each other, but you still love your child. And we want to do the right thing. If there's anybody on the call that's going through divorce right now and is receiving child support payments and their child now has turned 18 and is getting Social Security, child support at the age of 18 becomes income to the child. It's no longer spousal support, it's income to the child. And it will count as $1 for every dollar that child has. They're going to lose $2 of Social Security.
Right.
If the child support is paid to a first party special needs trust, the government will accept that. Of course, a lot of parents who are paying child support think, well, my wife or my husband, for that matter, are now getting an extra $948. I shouldn't have to pay child support. But we all know that where are we living on $948 a month?
Right.
So,
So I just thought of something that we can add on to this. The idea of that next generation who might be trustee for the sibling. So we set up my daughter with a trust. So even though she doesn't own much or it's already, the vessel is already there to help her protect assets that she knows she's probably going to need to help with her brother, if that makes sense. Just in case there's divorce at that level in the future. So we kind of build in these like contingency plans, if you will. Even though
years ago, the plan was to disinherit your child with special needs. And then if your neurotypical child got divorced and they were holding all the money, now half of it just went to the ex-husband. But by having the trust for the neurotypical child, one, for a child in the medical profession who might be sued and exposed, right? The money is protected, right? It's protected from creditors, it's protected from divorce. So, trusts are used in many, many situations. And, with the tax cut act that's, going to take effect at the end of 2025, where we're lowering the estate tax exemption, regardless of who gets in during the election, this was put in place under the Trump administration, that it was going to go down now from 27 million down to 13 million per couple, or about 6-7 million per individual. That's going to now open up estate tax planning for many of us who thought, well, 27 million is pretty much out of my reach. But 6 million, you have a couple million of insurance, you have retirement accounts, you have a home, a shore home. Many of us are there. Many of us are there. And estate planning now needs to be taken into consideration. And these multi-generational trusts and trusts for all of our children, you're going to be talking about it and hearing about it more and more.
Yeah. I think because it's coming up on the top of the hour, we should ask if there are any other questions and anything else you wanted to say, Bruce.
I would just love to see if there's something that we didn't address that somebody would like to know. You have our contact information. Jeanette has our emails. Many of you have reached out to us, in between sessions. We welcome your calls. Jeanette will get us everybody's email and we'll send out the what our loved ones need to know. As we get closer to the end of the year, I will have a new tax guide to send out of different tax benefits that families can take advantage of. But is there anything else that somebody would like to ask?
I don't see anything.
Okay.
So, oh, thank you. Could you send me? Yep. Yes, we are going to send out the letters. Absolutely. The booklet's very helpful. It's very thorough. It's long and it's not meant to be answered in one
In
sitting.
one sitting.
It's a dynamic, it's a lovely dynamic document so that you can adapt and change as the years go by and the needs change. Yeah,
We also have it as a QR code for those of us who are technically adept, right?
very good.
Keep it on your phone.
So,
All right, thank you.
yep. So just last bit of housekeeping, the October 3rd date is going to be changed. So I'm going to work with the Epilepsy Foundation and we're going to figure that out, but expect a little updated email. Some back when in January when we were setting this up, we didn't necessarily think through some of our fall dates. So thank you for joining us, especially now that it was the beginning of the school year. I know people are busy. So let us know if we can be of any help. Yeah, we're here for you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thank
Well,
you,
thank you,
Jeanette.
Susan. Thank you, Bruce, and everyone who is attending this evening. And we will see you for the next one. And the topic is transitions into adult-like and your retirement. All right. So have a good night, everyone.
All right. Good night. Good night.